Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast, available every morning on Apple, Spotify or wherever you listen. It's Friday the 4th of October in London. I'm Stephen Carroll.
And I'm Lizzie Burden. Coming up today, the price of oil steadies after surging on fears Israel may strike Iranian crude facilities.
Fast fashion giant Shein looks to sparkle for investors ahead of a possible London IPO.
Plus, the Goldman Sachs Prodigy struggling to crack into the Hedge-Fund elite. We'll have exclusive reporting on Isla Capital's recent difficulties.
Let's start with a roundup of our top stories.
The price of oil has steadied following its biggest one-day jump in almost a year. The move follows concerns that Israel may decide to strike Iranian crude facilities in response to Tehran's missile barrage earlier this week. Brent surged by 5% after President Joe Biden said the US was discussing whether to support potential Israeli attacks on Iranian energy infrastructure. He spoke to reporters on the White House lawn just as he prepared to board Marine One.
Do you support Israel striking Iran's oil facilities, sir?
We're in discussion of that. I think that would be a little... Anyway.
The Middle East accounts for about a third of the world's oil supply, and Iran is the third largest producer in OPEC. The spike in prices comes as fears grow of an all-out war in the Middle East. On Thursday, Israel said it bombed more than a dozen Hezbollah targets in Beirut, while G7 countries warned against an uncontrolled cycle of escalation.
France's Prime Minister says planned tax increases will hit about 300 of the country's biggest companies. Speaking during an interview with France 2 Television, Michel Barnier says he's not happy about the move, but the increase will be a temporary one, lasting for 1 or 2 years.
There will be a two-thirds reduction in public spending, and that will be very difficult. And 1/3 will come from an exceptionally temporary targeted tax. On who? I will tell you. On the biggest French companies, those that make 1 billion or more in turnover.
That's Michel Barnier there speaking through a translator. The measure is intended to help rein in the French budget deficit. Barnier says tax increases for individuals will be increased for the wealthiest, which he defines as a couple with an annual income of €500,000 or more.
Fast fashion giant Shein is taking the next step in its journey to become a public company. That's despite still awaiting official sign-off for the move. Bloomberg's Tiwa Adebayo has the details.
Worth an estimated £50 billion, Shein's IPO would make it one of the biggest London listings in the last decade. Now sources say the retailer is holding early investor meetings to prepare. It's been a complicated process for the brand, which some have accused of using forced labour practices. After plans for a New York flotation were met with opposition from lawmakers, Bloomberg understands Shein confidentially filed papers in the UK. But the idea has also sparked backlash here. Just last month, the chair of the Commons Business and Trade Committee called for greater scrutiny of the company's supply chain. A company spokesperson said at the time that Shein has a zero-tolerance policy for forced labour. In London, Tiwa Adebayo, Bloomberg Radio.
HSBC is said to be cancelling some events and further curtailing travel as the bank's new CEO seeks to keep a tight lid on costs. Sources say it recently scrapped a summit of commercial bankers in India, as well as some other off-site events around the world. The bank has already slowed hiring and asked investment bankers to rein in their travel and expenses.
Dock workers at US East and Gulf Coast ports have agreed to start moving cargo again. That's as they continue collective bargaining with their employers on a new contract. Bloomberg's Scott Carr reports.
The Longshoremen's Association and the U.S. Maritime Alliance say they've reached a tentative agreement on wages and will extend their existing master contract through this January 15th, at which point Bloomberg's managing editor of economic policy, Kate Davidson, says they'll still have to negotiate several outstanding issues.
One of the things that they wanted were greater protections against the kind of automation that we've seen at ports on the West Coast. And so that was a real sticking point. This tentative agreement doesn't address that, but it does go some way toward addressing some of the wage demands. So they've agreed to a temporary deal that would at least allow them to start moving cargo again.
Davidson says both sides were apparently under heavy pressure from the White House to come to an agreement. In Washington, I'm Scott Carr, Bloomberg Radio.
Mark Zuckerberg is now the world's second richest person. The Meta platform CEO and founder's net worth now stands at just over $206 billion, according to the Bloomberg Billionaires Index. That puts Zuckerberg just ahead of Jeff Bezos, but still around $50 billion behind Elon Musk, who retains the top spot. Shares in Meta have continued to climb in recent months as investors become more confident in the company's bet on the metaverse. In a moment, we'll bring you more on those rising tensions in the Middle East, plus a story showing how even the biggest names in investing can struggle to build a top-flight hedge fund. But first, another story that caught our eye this morning. The quest to bring back the dodo, among others, I should point out, in case you think that one extinct bird was getting special treatment. So this is the latest investment that's going into a startup called Colossal Biosciences. It's the Lord of the Rings director, Peter Jackson, and his partner, producer Fran Walsh, putting $10 million into this company. Their mission to try and bring back the likes of the dodo, the woolly mammoth, the Tasmanian tiger. The process involves, and I'm not a scientist, so forgive me, collecting ancient genetic material from museums and fossils and combining them with their closest surviving species. Lizzie, you look sceptical.
I wonder if he knows that you can't bring back the Hobbit. But look, if
back is one of the questions, but yeah.
If Paris Hilton and the Winklevoss twins are investing, then obviously this is a good idea.
I mean, look, it's very ambitious, certainly. By the way, in case you're wondering how these investors might plan to get their money back, the plan is that the returns would come through spinning out the genetic engineering technology developed along the way. Certainly a big bet and attracting some big names as well.
Can I bring back my Uncle Alan then?
I mean, I'm not getting into that. That's a whole other kettle of fish.
I really need to learn how this works. But should we get back to the serious news of the morning, to the Middle East now? Israel has bombed more Hezbollah sites in Beirut as we await the country's response to the Iranian missile barrage earlier this week. A statement from the G7 called on countries in the region to, quote, act responsibly and with restraint. And our EMEA News Director, Rosalind Matheson, joins us now for more. Ros, we had oil prices jumping yesterday after President Joe Biden said that they were discussing these attacks on Iran's nuclear facilities. Is that now thought to be the most likely option being considered?
Well, it seems like Joe Biden has ruled out the US assisting Israel if they were to try and target Israel's nuclear facilities. And it's very doubtful that Israel could do that on its own. So that seems to be off the table. And that would really be, pardon the pun, the nuclear option here. That would be the thing that would really trigger escalation in the region. These are the nuclear enrichment facilities in Iran. They're deeply guarded, they're deeply underground, and they're very hard to get to, and that's for a reason, obviously. But the conversation is really about what kind of response Israel can do, needs to do here, because the blizzard that we saw from Iran was slightly different from the one in April. These were just ballistic missiles, so they got there a lot faster, so there was an element of surprise there. There was some risk that they were going to hit cities. As a result, some of them did appear to even get through, and so for Israel now, it's like they can't just do what they did back in April, which was send some drones to an Iranian military site and call themselves done. It does seem that there is a conversation around maybe targeting Iran's oil infrastructure. That obviously would be significant not only for Iran, but also for the oil market, for the global supply. We've seen oil generally shrug off the tensions in the Middle East this year, and that's because they're not that worried about supply. But if you get supply affected from Iran, then you've got a major change for the market. So do they hit a military site? Do they hit oil installations? It seems to be one of those two, but it seems like the nuclear sites are off the table.
Okay, so or the focus now on oil and potentially other options involved there as well. At the same time, Ros, we've had Israel striking more targets in Lebanon. What do we know about the situation on the ground there?
Well, as you were saying, they've hit about another dozen sites in Beirut overnight. Authorities say that a number of people were killed, particularly in a medical facility that seems to be affiliated with Hezbollah. So you do have a continuation of heavy strikes on Beirut itself, but you also have Israeli troops still operating over the border into Lebanon. And that's what Israel has said is going to be targeted and limited action. It's very unclear how many Israeli troops are there, but we do know they are engaging, it seems, with Hezbollah over the border. There's been reports of a number of skirmishes in different villages, certainly of some firefights that are going on. So it doesn't seem that it's going to stay necessarily limited and targeted. Of course, for Israel, the question is, do they get pulled in over the border in a protracted fashion? So we are seeing really multiple fronts now inside Lebanon for Israel, both in terms of airstrikes that are continuing on Beirut and their troops operating on the ground just over the border.
Well, where you've got the G7 statement calling for restraint, is anyone going to listen?
The G7, that is the question. The G7's been calling for restraint in a lot of things for a long period of time, not just in the Middle East, but also obviously when it comes to Russia's war with Ukraine. And the question is, do Iran and Israel really listen to anybody at this point? I mean, if the Israeli administration is not necessarily taking strong cues from the US, its single biggest ally militarily and so on, then is it going to listen to calls from restraint from the G7? Of course, we've seen the G7 calling for ceasefires in Gaza for nearly a year now with the war that's going on there, and obviously now in Lebanon, and keen to try and create the environment for that to happen and to facilitate talks on it. But what the G7 can tangibly do, aside from perhaps discuss further sanctions on Iran, is really hard to see.
Ros, as we're waiting to see what Israel does next, I'm curious about the position that Benjamin Netanyahu is in. He had been criticised at home over his handling of the war in Gaza. Does this escalation on several fronts strengthen his political position in Israel?
Well, there have been ebbs and flows in his position at home, and certainly he's quite hemmed in by the right. And he, in fact, that's sort of his own making in a way because of the deals he's done with the right in Israel. His personal popularity does seem to ebb and flow, but in these moments, of course, of great challenge for Israel, you do see people tending to rally behind the government on this, and certainly the feeling, that for people who've been living in the north of Israel, that they do want to return to their homes. They've been unable to return to their homes because of shelling by Hezbollah for almost a year now. There's a strong desire to do that across the country, and so you can see that is a unifying point in a way for the government. They're doing this because they want to create a safe space, they say, for all Israelis inside Israel. And so that might be a moment, again, of support for Benjamin Netanyahu. In the broader run, of course, there are big questions about his leadership.
OK. RME News Director Rosalind Matheson, we thank you for the update.
Next to a story from the hedge fund industry. 3 years ago, Ed Eisler left his job leading Goldman Sachs' trading division to set up his own fund, capitalising on a rush of money into multi-strategy firms. He was a big name at Goldman, but 3 years in, Eisler Capital is losing money, showing how hard it is to build a top-flight hedge fund. Our hedge fund reporter Nishant Kumar joins us now for more details on this story. Nishant, good morning. Tell us a bit more then about Ed Eisler and Sam Wisnia, who was another big Goldman name who joined him in this venture.
Ed Eisler is one of the best names in the industry right now. He spent 2 decades at Goldman. He was one of their best and brightest, in the words of Goldman's CEO then. He swiftly progressed in his career, becoming a partner by the age of just 30, eventually climbing the corporate ladder, and he ran the once money spinning trading division of Goldman. In terms of his origin, he was born in Russia and raised in Austria. At the age of 18, he moved to US for studies. He got his first taste of finance working at Lehman Brothers, where he did masters in applied mathematics in the evening. That's one of the toughest things to do. When at Goldman, he worked alongside some of their top bankers at the time, including Pablo Salami, who is now the co-chief investment officer at another giant multi-strat, Citadel. In terms of him and his contact with Sam Wisnia, they both know each other since the late 1990s. So this joint venture, this partnership goes long way back. They worked together at Goldman, then they tried to set up a private equity firm initially, before reuniting at Eisler Capital in 2018.
And so how has Isla Capital actually performed compared to its rivals? And then what went wrong, Nishant?
So performance-wise, the previous 2 years were decent. In 2022, they made 14%. 23, they were up 9%. This year has been really tough. They are losing money so far as of September. And that compares with most of their bigger rivals, nearly making double-digit returns. So by comparison, they are not doing well this year. And in terms of what went wrong, look, this is a very, very tough industry. They are a new player in the market. It's incredibly tough to break into the multi-strat world. They find themselves trying to grow amid a brutal and an expensive war for talent. Multi-strats are all about the kind of people you can hire, the traders who can make money for you all the time, persistently, without losing. As an expert says in our story, it's like building a Goldman Sachs from scratch. You need a dozen highly paid teams, world-class infrastructure, NASA caliber risk management. They have all that, but it takes really long time to become larger and bigger and effective in this multi-strat world.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.